So as we start to talk about fungi, we're going to have several different phylums involved that we're going to take a close look at. But most of the ones that you've probably seen in your environment are going to just fall into one phylum. But that's just one phylum. We will discuss 5 different phylums in this chapter. The structures that you typically see when you see fungi or you see a mushroom, that is just a small part of the living organism. There's a much larger network that's usually present underneath the Earth's surface, and we're going to talk about the various structures that they have to both those underground parts of the organism as well as the above ground parts. So as we go through and talk about what's common to all fungi, first of all, they're all going to be heterotrophic. So what we mean by heterotrophic is that they can't make their own food. So since they can't make their own food, they are going to be absorbing their food from their surroundings. And the way that they do this is that they're actually going to secrete enzymes. And when they secrete these enzymes, this is going to digest food outside of them. And then they will absorb that. So after they digest their food externally, then they absorb the food. So to do this, they're going to have very large surface areas that will be ideal for absorption. And they have several different types of relationships with the environment that they use to absorb this food. So one of the things that a lot of fungi are going to do, and perhaps one of the things that they're most known for, is their role as decomposers. So by decomposers, they are basically digesting dead organic material. So that's what you see happening in this first picture here. These are shelf fungi, and they are digesting a fallen log. So they secrete the enzymes so that they can digest that woody material. And then once it's digested sufficiently, then they absorb the nutrients from that. And that's a very important role for us ecologically. We also have some that will have symbiotic, or you could say mutualistic relationships. And in this picture here, we're looking at a lichen. And a lichen is usually a symbiotic relationship between a fungi and either a cyanobacteria or some type of algae. And they will basically help each other out. So the algae or the cyanobacteria tends to perform the photosynthesis, and then the fungi tends to help with the nitrogen acquisition a lot of times. Finally, they can perform parasitic type infections. That's what you see happening to this poor little moth on the bottom. It is infected with the fungus, and you see the fruiting structures of the fungus coming up out of that moth. So several different roles that they can perform. We have the decomposers, the mutualistic relationships, and then also the parasitic ones. In all of these cases, the fungi is having to have its food ready-made for it. So it's not going to be able to make its own food. It's going to digest food from some other source. Now, if we talk about the structure of the fungi, they tend to be made up of what we call hyphae most often. So what a hyphae is this is just kind of a linear stretch of cells. It's a long filament, and this is going to be a branched filament. So when we talk about fungi, usually you just see this network of long, skinny tubes of cells, and this is going to have a maximum surface area. And we said that they need a maximum surface area because they are absorbing their nutrients from their surroundings. That is the way that they're going to feed. So they will have this very long, large network of hyphae, and a lot of times that extends throughout the underground. So if we draw a picture here, and that would be my soil line, a lot of times students are familiar with the typical mushroom structure. Okay, so here's my mushroom. That's really just one part of a typical fungi. So underneath the ground is where you would find all of this branched hyphae that we talked about, and that's really the structure part that's doing all of the feeding. So that is going to be excreting enzymes that will digest things in the environment, and then it will absorb those nutrients so that it can grow further. Most of the effort with fungi is going to be put into producing even more hyphae so that they can absorb even more nutrients and then they can grow even more. So that's really where most of the effort and energy is going to go. Now, when they tend to run out of nutrients, that's when they start to reproduce sexually. These structures that you tend to see above ground, those are really for sexual reproduction most often. So they're not going to be present all of the time. That's a limited period of time when we actually need to produce some new offspring. This is also going to be made up of hyphae, and they're arranged so that you have that little mushroom structure to it. But again, that is really just for a specific purpose. It is for sexual reproduction. So that little mushroom that you see on the ground is just a fraction of the actual organism that's underneath the ground. There are cases where one single fungi extends miles. So they do get extremely, extremely large. So hyphae is what we call this network of filaments. If we're talking about all of the network of filaments that makes up the fungi, we call it a mycelium. And if we look closer at these fungi, here's just a microscope picture of them, we can classify the fungi hyphae in two ways. So on this slide, we have two different pictures of the types of hyphae. We can have hyphae that have cell divisions, and then we have ones that do not have cell divisions. So over on this side, we see the cell divisions. Those a lot of times are called septums. So those are cell walls that will be dividing the hyphae into individual cells that each have their own nuclei. And that's what we call septate hyphae. Over on the right-hand side, we don't see any divisions between them. So what you end up with is a bunch of nuclei that all reside in this one hyphae. So the nuclei are all flowing in the same cytoplasm, and this is what we call cenocytic. Some species tend to have septate hyphae, some tend to have cenocytic hyphae. Really just depends on the species. Now, another thing to point out here is that while we have fungi and they are eukaryotic cells, they do have a cell wall, and the cell wall is made up of a material called chitin. This is different, obviously, from the cell wall material that made up plant cell walls, and plant cell walls are made up of cellulose. So this is a big difference between them. Here you have some microscope pictures of these two types of hyphae so you can have a closer look. On the left-hand side, we can see those chitin cell walls that are breaking these hyphae into individual cells. So they do have the cross walls or the septum. And then on the right-hand side, we see the cenocytic hyphae where it's just continuous and we don't have any divisions there.